Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Associate Professor, Program Director, Communication, Media, and Ethics, Instructor for COM 2113, Media Culture and Social Influence. That's how it's supposed to be said. Media Culture and Social Influence. None of this media, culture, and social influence. But D2L is going to D2L, right? Okay, I am here to get on with the program, and we are doing some asynchronous Q&A lecture. It's a long title, it's messy, but we'll roll with it. Basically, we want to take some time out of each week, in an ideal world, and respond to some of your submitted questions based on the weekly readings. And you all did an excellent job with this. The early course effort is strong with this group. So I have a few questions that I'm going to respond to, and really based on some limitations of time. Also, I was going to give this a go without glasses, and then I just couldn't read the questions from here. And computer, of course, it's suddenly not synced to the printer. So these are things. These are 21st century things. They have to do with media, and that, after all, is what we're here to talk about. At least in part, we're going to be looking at questions relating to messages, an introduction to communication, and media and society, a critical perspective, both from Arthur Asa Berger. And we're not just a bunch of Berger files here. We if you're in the major long enough, there's a plethora of voices you will hear from. This just happens to coincide these two texts in this one course, and so enjoy that. And he is writing in two different directions, and I think that is something we can appreciate. Hey, why Berger? What's with all the burgers here? I'm a vegan. So tell me, Dr. G, what is going on? It feels like overkill. And it just so happens, look, here's the facts. Berger writes in a very readerly style, and by readerly style, I would say within the demography of undergraduate students of all ages, really. And he tends to consolidate very long ideas that could take many, many, many pages and words to talk about, to process. And he refines it down. And not only does that, he does it with a sense of humor. I don't know if you've picked up on this yet, but he has a sense of humor he writes with. And sometimes that we need a little bit of that energy, right? That Berger energy to wash down all of this content, right, that we're working through at a collegiate level. Sometimes we just need to chill out and have a little bit of a good time learning, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in this class. And hopefully you all are already having some fun engaging in those media texts. Well, let's get to some questions. I'm not going to be able to get to everyone's questions, but I just did a strategic sampling, and we'll continue to rotate through folks' questions. We'll put time aside for this activity, but it's often a time permitting activity. So we can't get to every single question everyone submits each week. Instead, what we have to do is grab a sample size and then simply look at, hey, what were the best questions written? The most effective questions that are the most polished, right? It's the holistic technique, right? Who's writing great questions, and let's engage in more. Even if they're not great questions, like who's getting at ideas that are important, that are really aligned with things we can tackle in this class. So we'll do that. And perhaps this is something we're increasingly trying to do. There might be opportunity week 4, week 5 for us to maybe spread these around. Maybe each of us can start to speak to these questions. Although sometimes, we can get into the speculative response realm, and then it gets at a question that comes up here, which is verifiability. Like, are we speaking truth to things, or are we just assigning our own values onto them? That's something to consider. Well, enough of an intro. Let's get into a few of these questions, at least, for your week 1 readings. All right, I'm going to start with a couple of questions from Corey, and permit me as I read these and have processed some potential responses for us. Looking at Berger's Messages, all right? So that's the other point I wanted to make. Messages is a communication discipline, communication studies focused type book. Media and Society, more of a media studies book, all right? So they are looking in two different directions, and that's why we can appreciate that. Even though it's the same author, there's really two different subject matters. But you'll also find some crossover, and that's healthy. That's natural. It's not dishonest. It's not unethical. It is okay for some of these ideas to cross over. In fact, you, this Luth student, pat yourself on the back when you do find those points of crossover. Well, Corey types in regards to messages, chapter 1, page 17 tells us that there is not mass communication because there is no mass audience. What if there was a form of mass communication that could be sent and received? Would people be okay with that, or would they question it? Well, if we could agree on anything, and no one can agree on anything anymore, by the way, not in 2020 and beyond, forget about it. If we could hypothetically agree on everything, that would mean there actually probably would be an issue, that we'd all be conditioned in the exact same direction. What would it look like? Have we read George Orwell's 1984? No, you say. Okay, well, have we seen the film version of George Orwell's 1984? No, also no. Okay. Well, have we at least seen the famous Super Bowl ad that aired in 1984 for Apple computers, directed by none other than Ridley Scott? Maybe. Okay, maybe. We heard about it at least. Or, well, we're getting somewhere. You can Google that. It's available for free. Like, dozens of versions of it exist on the internet. But the whole point of that book, that this allegorical tome on fascism and its integration with technology, it's very prophetic, future shock science fiction, if we want to call it that. And some would argue we've kind of come full circle in terms of maybe the technologies depicted in that. But this is an instance of where, would we be okay? Would we be questions? Well, I mean, is the flaw in the framework here? We are innately question-seeking beings, and there will always be a pocket resistance. We've seen The Matrix, right? Neo is both an anomaly but a recurrence in terms of bucking his systemic programming. And so, we can think about people in the same way. The point Berger's making is, as each of us is a member of multiple societies. And I wrote in the margins of my book long ago, we are fragmented and plural in response to there is no, air quotes, mass communication because there is no mass audience. That's his point, that we're plural, that we're not singular in that way. It's not hive mind. And that's an innate part of our being. But good food for thought, right? Good food for thought there. Gets us excited. We're scared already. We're scaring people. So let's move on, Court. Next question. The text communicates that the Toulmin model is important because it lays out the elements important to making an argument. This includes offering evidence to support one's claim. How do people justify an argument if they do not have any support? Any support, or aka evidence? This is a fundamental question. And the answer is tragic because the answer is, well, we do it all the time. We make arguments with zero evidence. People make baseless claims all the time. It's in nearly every comment section, every story on Facebook. But before that, people would make these same arguments in all the other little nooks and crannies of life. But what part of the tenets of learning, as opposed to thinking of it as something that's indoctrinating us in college, one of the tenets of higher education is that we're learning to be better communicators, that we're learning to be stronger researchers, that we're learning to be more disciplined and ethical, examiners of information, seekers of evidence to support claims, and then ultimately supporters of these little t truths that we are able to ascertain. And so, of course, somewhere along the way, that became a dirty word in culture, in certain cultural pockets, we should say, not everywhere. And, it has to do with a couple of different factors. But, behind a lot of those hard-boiled opinions that are anti-education is that's saying controversial things is profitable for cable news or radio talk hosts and those that would, wish ill will. So that's a little bit of a conversation starter in a nutshell. And there are more questions. Let's see. How do people justify an argument if they don't have any support? That's where I answer. Do they get their information from hearsay? Of course they do. Now, and here's another issue we face. I mean, we face it even in college, even amongst those within our borders and boundaries. No one has the attention span to no one has the attention span for processes required to solidify those claims. So people are interested in confirmation bias, on the other hand. I'm more interested in hearing words and thoughts and opinions and seeing headlines that reinforce my existing belief set. I say me generally, like the average person. And for that reason, guess what? Software developers understand this. And there's big business and money to be made off of telling you stories and opinions that reinforce your confirmation bias. So what happens? And we are getting to some of the questions that you all talked about in your video responses. What happens is the social media algorithms, you've heard this buzzword before, these algorithms realign. And so when it's just like Netflix, how your queue changes. What it's recommended changes over time based on your previous behavior. Well, this is how on a platform like Facebook, suddenly after a while, you're not hearing so many dissenting voices against your opinion, but you are receiving a lot of the same opinions that you have. And it's because the algorithm has picked up on what it's interpreting as your bias, your internal bias, and it's redirecting information to you that will satisfy you in that way. And guess what happens when we receive that kind of information? We get a dopamine hit. And what happens when we have a dopamine hit? And we're talking internal chemicals released in our body. You stay on the page longer. You keep scrolling longer. You appreciate, or at least are drawn to, that social media platform longer, more often. And thus, the system wins. All right. Let's see here. We got time for one more. We'll do a segment break. On page 31, under mass communication, the text states that a number of small corporations own or control the mass media. How do we know that they are not trying to push their own directive? Is this why some people have such a difficult time trusting media? It is why. And it's really bad to reduce things down to an essence. I think there are plural answers to all of these questions that Corey and others are asking in week one. But let's look at it this way. Media corporate, because this cuts on both sides, all right? So, and by the way, this idea of two sides to decide everything is a cultural myth. It's a political myth that we buy into, that we basically agree to, both consciously and unconsciously, when it's much more diverse than that, plural, as Berger would write. But here's a reality we face. Media corporations do have their own directive. I'm using your term here, and that is profit. Okay. And when we understand that their decisions are profit driven, that is to say, the ways in which something, let's take cable news. All right. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, absolutely throwing everybody in this pool. Owen, whatever it's called. One American News. That they create talking points that they believe their primary audience demographic wants to hear. Does that sound familiar? It should, because I just talked about confirmation bias. So these programs are developing their talking points based on a type of confirmation bias. And what happens as a result is, if it's a popular bias, then their ratings go up. Well, if their ratings go up, then they can charge more in terms of the advertisers that sponsor those programs or support that network. And what happens when the sponsors do it? Well, they're all worth more, right? The sponsors get more spotlight. The program is more valued, right, in terms of its public exchange. Oh, if it's publicly traded, then they want more shareholders. They want more higher stock prices for their value. And so there's this enormous system of exchange value going on. And it's not as simple as, where did the missing puppy go, right, in Cleveland? It's about something much bigger, but really rudimentary, and that is, corporate profits. And when profits run things and we become more self-aware of that, well, then we tend to distrust the information that we receive, even if it's an accurate piece of information, or even if there is a logic to the argument that you disagree with. We still find reasons to dissent, because the ethics of the perceived journalism of something like a cable news network is put into question, as it should. But it's a catch-22, because obviously that's media is a business, and we live in a free market society, and so we're governed by these rules, and people's livelihoods are also at stake. I mean, people are making a living off of reporting on things, just as other people are making a living off of arguing about things. And I think the best thing we can do is have more self-control when we're engaging in that kind of media, right? Be able to provide a healthy pause, and be able to take a step back and not get so engaged in a heated sense, right? For a lot of people that lack that self-awareness, they just they kind of respond on extremely emotional levels, and they'll not only tune in more and more and more often, but they're getting on things like the social media then on a different screen, and then they're kind of battling and babbling, and their babbling is a form of battling, and they're probably doing it, more babble than battle. And when they babble, it's in the accurate use of that term, because they're not using a lot of evidence to support their ideas. All right, we'll do a segment break there. We'll jump to some more questions after this.